Thank you so much, Professor Farouk Topan, for this great introduction, because half of the material I'm going to speak about also speaks to the question of politics of alienation on behalf of the presenter that you did for. So thank you so much. More than any moment in history, Kenya's Muslims of all persuasion face tremendous social challenges as a result of heightened radicalization and youth recruitment into violent extremism in the Horn of Africa, because of groups like Al-Shabaab and its variants such as the Jaish al-Iman or Al-Hijra in Kenya. And they have borne the brunt of ruthless state machinery that often engages in extrajudicial killings and other forms of indiscriminate, gross human rights violation over time. And due to several alleged and real marginalization discourses and historical injustice meted against their religionists by successive regime at the coast and northern Kenya, propagandist ideologies of jihadists often draw on existing corpus of marginalization discourses. And so they call upon Kenyan youth to migrate to Somalia and other parts of jihadist-controlled utopias as a commendable solution. So the quagmire places incredible burden on Kenya's ulama and Muslim civil society activists as producers of counter-narrativity to try to reappropriate the Kenyan state as a multi-religious, pluralistic, hospitable, secular state, and at the same time try to condemn selective targeting of members of non-Muslim communities in terrorist attacks, and try to reinterpret and contextualize appropriate religious knowledge as basis of counter-propaganda. So this paper is based on ongoing research funded by Volkswagen Foundation on a study of Muslim faith-based organizations and their involvement in counter-radicalization discourses. The name that largely is referred to is, unlike counterterrorism that is state-driven, all these other kinds of initiatives that are done by civil society organizations are called Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism, or PCVE, in short CVE. So I would like to give a very short reference to a recent happening in Lamu, in a region called Ishikania. If you are following the Kenyan newspaper recently, you must have heard that Al-Shabaab militants came to a small town and gathered all men together, and for around 1 or 2 hours they preached to them about jihadist ideologies and so on and so on. And the police had vacated the area. So what they did was they came to the police station and put down the Kenyan flag and put up the Al-Shabaab flag. And these kind of incidences are pointed to not just transnational nature of these militant groups, but a form of growth of local insurgencies within this kind of region. And so what the civil society organizations are doing is certain form of citizenship imagination, despite the fact that there exists a strong feeling of marginalization within Kenya's Muslim communities. How can we still interpret our existence within the country? And I want to speak a little bit about this poster. This poster is from Facebook page of Brave Movement. The page is called Jihad for All, and it was very active in 2016, 2015, and recently it's not that much active, but this particular picture caught my attention when I was trying to collect the materials around. It says jihad is not killing the innocent, and Islam is peace, love, and unity. And I will speak a little bit about this. This page is related to an initiative called Building Resilience Against Violent Extremism, or BRAVE. BRAVE was formed in mid-2015, and BRAVE is not an ordinary civil society organization engaged in PCVE in Kenya. It models itself as a movement that aspires to inspire hundreds of Muslims in Kenya to join its cause in producing alternative counter-narrative, those of the jihadists, to legitimize these groups as an Islamic to its core, threat to national security and inter-religious relation, and danger to the lives and properties of all citizens, including Muslim communities. So for this grand role, BRAVE ran series of radio advertisement, television advertisement, produced even a very elaborate manual, and trained dozens of religious leaders and civil society activists, and maintained presence both online and offline for various audiences that it had, as a way of engaging potential stakeholders and recipients of these activities. Coming back to this poster, it is strikingly unique for BRAVE to call its page on counter-narrativity Jihad for All, because we often think that jihad is what the militant groups does. So it's an attempt to democratize the oft monopolized discourse about jihad beyond what the militant wanted to be, by straighting the meaning of jihad from military engagement against unbelievers and their associates to more mundane concern about everyday struggles and charity to others. The producers wish to turn the tables on the jihadists in their own field. This particular poster, however, is intriguing not for stating that jihad is not killing innocent Muslims, but for labeling Islam itself as peace, love, and unity. These three qualities associated with Islam in this poster are indeed long-standing national values as espoused in Nyayo philosophy of the Kenya's second president, Daniel Arap Moi. The three, peace, love, and unity, still evokes within Kenyan population patriotism, interfaith and interethnic cohesion, tolerance, belongingness in a multi-religious plural society. One needs not to go any further to understand the meaning of these three words, but to think of the country's loyalty pledge, which ends with the word Harambe and then perpetuated in Nyayo philosophy of peace, love, and unity. And this also brings us back to other forms of national values. For instance, the French, it tries to echo the same kind of national values such as the states, French laïcité, égalité, French, despite, of course, long-standing marginalization discourse within the French Muslim communities. To continue, I'm using the word attempt in referring to how Brave does in terms of looking at citizenship, because the task is extremely undoubting. It also distances the heterogeneous communities in Kenya, the Muslim communities in Kenya, from the brutal acts committed by violent extremists within the country as not representative of their faith communities or not congruent with the membership in a peaceful, multi-religious nation state in Kenya. Perhaps to get a better comprehension of the above nuances in Brave's activity, allow me to quote verbatim one of the advertisements that they had run recently on national television, and Mara here had seen the video of this advert in another workshop. And the advert goes like this: violent extremists have tried to divide the country on religious line. We, the Kenyan Muslims, have said no more division. Let us reclaim and take charge of the narrative used by the extremists. How? By speaking the truth. Islam does not condone killing of innocent lives, never. As Muslims, Christians, and other denominations, let's unite together against radicalization and violent extremism. We can influence the narrative and counter-narrative by countering the narrative of the violent extremism. We, in this case, the producers refer, we are Kenyans, brought together by our national values. So there's this extreme focus on the fact that there exist certain core ideas that all of us as a citizen can agree upon. We must not, and they continue, we must not be divided by violent extremism and be part of this movement. So in this presentation, I wish to speak a little bit about the historical basis for strained Muslim-state relations during the colonial and post-colonial period that exacerbated the discourse of inequality, marginalization, neglect, historical injustice, and subsequently fuels the feeling of second-class citizenship that has often been exploited by radical groups for recruitment and violence. And because Prof had already presented a little in depth about politics of alienation, especially at the coast, I'll briefly just go over similar kind of discourses in northern parts of Kenya, where Muslim majority communities such as the Boran and the Somali are found. And in the second part of the presentation, I'll try to present a case study of Brave itself. How do they construct counter-narrativity? What do they mean when they construct what they consider as appropriate and legitimate discourse against those ones of the jihadist group? And the Prof had already mentioned in depth about how the Kenyan coast was during the colonial period and the politics of racial, ethnic, and other forms of sectarian differences within the coast that had made the area such a fertile region for disagreement with the Kenyan state. And I will go straight to the time just prior to Kenya's independence. The British did some form of consensus meeting among the communities in northern Kenya, among the Somalis, among the Boran, among the Sakuye, and there was large disagreement among the population that they wished to be part of Somalia rather than part of Kenya. But without solving this quagmire, they suggested to the incoming regime led by Kenyatta that northern Kenya becomes the 7th province of Kenya. During this period, northern Kenya was largely referred to as the Northern Frontier District. It was closed. There was limited presence of British investment in terms of road, education, or anything, because it was largely arid, unlike central part of Kenya. So when independence came, the population was shocked by the turn of event, and just like the coast, where there was a lot of negotiation of whether to belong within the Kenyan state or outside it, large population of people within this area supported separatism from Kenyan state from this period. And months after coming into power, Kenyatta immediately declared a state of emergency, and for about 6 years, the area saw immense violence, livestock raiding, civil war that displaced large population of communities in this area, and heightened the feeling of second-class citizenship within the region. And so much so that in subsequent regime, as was spoken about here, some of the discourse of marginalization were never solved. And by the time of the presidency of Mwai Kibaki, so pervasive was this discourse of marginalization and state neglect that Mwai Kibaki actually constituted a special commission titled Presidential Special Action Committee to address specific concerns of Muslim communities in regard to alleged harassment / discrimination in application and enforcement of law. And this commission was led by Engineer Sharawi, he himself being an ethnic Somali, and it was instituted in 2007. But the reports were out, but they were never made public. Alongside with this report were also reports that were done by TJRC, the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, that actually saw a lot of historical injustice and cases of discrimination among certain sections that are largely also occupied by Muslim communities. These two reports were never made public, or some of the discourses that were discussed by these committees were never made part of things to be implemented. It is to this community that now violent extremism comes in. And violent extremism groups already finds among the communities a very strong discourse of alienation. And for instance, in a promotional video, one of the Al-Shabaab spokesmen and a senior leader called Sheikh Ali Mahmoud Rage said a number of sentences in that video that had strong ramification of how Kenya sees itself, or how Muslims who join such groups see themselves. And these were groups of Kenyan foreign recruits that were graduating. And he mentioned to them, you have to be an army that will conquer Kenya so that you may return to your families and relatives in a state of glory and uplift them from suffering and humiliation by permission of God, and so on and so on. And he refers to them like Mujahideen brothers who have endured hardship of immigration, hijrah, and were patient during the training, and they have endured training session so that they can liberate Kenya from the hands of crusaders and so on and so on. So there is a feeling, there's not a feeling, but there's a strong tendency by violent extremist group to immediately exploit existing discourse of marginalization. So in a way, Kenya and Kenyans have, in the eyes of the terrorist group, become the evil other. So for groups like Al-Shabaab or their affiliates such as Al-Hijra, Jaish al-Iman, they label the country and the occupants, especially the Christian population, as the crusaders. So we have sort of replaced the far away crusaders, the usual suspect being the Americans, European countries, Israelis, and so on. Kenya literally provides the jihadists with very convincing props for their violent action and propaganda. And without this kind of narrative that exists within Kenya, their ideas and violence will have been meaningless and hollow. So Prof had already also mentioned in the paper presented that Kenya went into Somalia in 2011, and this incursion was largely targeted to oust Al-Shabaab from specific points along its border, and also to create some kind of buffer zone within the country and these militant groups. Of course, the evaluation since 2011 to date is that there is not much more progress that has been done in this sector, and that means that there is continuous presence of Kenya's military force in Somalia as part of AMISOM. And unlike other countries, Kenya is the only country among the AMISOM countries that shares a strong border with Somalia. So until recently, the state's strategy for addressing this runaway insecurity due to terrorism has been largely counterproductive and highly insensitive, as it heightens suspicion and feeling of persecution due to rampant abuse of human rights, unresolved cases of enforced disappearance, and security swoop on Muslim majority areas. For instance, in 2014, 2015, there was swoop on Isili, where hundreds of people are incarcerated at a stadium here in Nairobi. So the question is, do Muslims in Kenya feel that they belong? The narrative of recruitment feeds on this existing discourse of disenfranchisement, of non-belongingness, of non-representativity in matters of national politics, of systematic underdevelopment and neglect by subsequent regimes since independence, and of stringent requirements upon application and acquisition of national identity cards. For instance, if someone from northern Kenya has to apply for an ID, they have to be asked to, can you come with the birth certificate of your father, birth certificate of your... And some of these communities are largely pastoral. My friend here, Tito, might agree with me on this, and it's immensely impossible to acquire the document that classifies you as a Kenyan, which is the national identity card, and travels between towns like, of course, Lamu right now, and Mombasa, or Garissa and Nairobi. You'll have to go through 4, 5, 6 different barriers of police. And possession of national identity card is not just a guarantee of citizenship within the Muslim communities. Individuals are also subjected to second layer of validation, which is, you might be asked in Kiswahili, habari yako. And if you are a Somali looking, you don't speak Swahili, and you are a mature adult, they'll start to say, where did you go to school? Are you really a Kenyan in that case? So there is a growing ramification in terms of how identity accusation actually feeds into the feeling of second-class citizenship. So to go straight to Brave Movement's ideas, prior to the establishment of Brave Movement, ideological response to violent extremism have been individualized, few and far between. As was mentioned before, there were some sheikhs who are unfortunately referred to the names like moderate sheikhs. I don't know what that actually is supposed to mean, who are able to produce alternative narratives to those ones of Makaburi and Rogo. These efforts were associated with these moderate sheikhs were largely done in urban settings such as Mombasa, and they became targets of sympathizers of radical extremists. And some of them were actually murdered, whether by the militant groups or the state, no one knows. So whenever these kind of incidents occur, it has been the response of the Muslim community, Muslim religious leaders, to issue declarative statements. They go on the national television and say, we equivocally condemn these events, and this is not done in our name, and these guys don't represent us. So Brave actually rose out of that frustration, out of that impotence of religious cadre in Kenya, to provide credible alternative ideological narrative to those of the militant in institutionalized manner, and to equip vulnerable youth, madrasa teachers, mosque prayer leaders, civil society activists, and those involved in this kind of programs with legitimate counter-narrative to use. So it was largely born after the Garissa attack in 2015, and immediately after the attack, the organizers immediately went on online campaign on national television, producing, facilitating videos that could actually be used as part of education of the larger Kenyan masses, but at the same time also training for specific groups of constituencies within Kenya. So in comparison with other global initiatives such as Prevent in UK, or other forms of CVE in Saudi Arabia or UAE or France, Brave is largely intra-faith. So the membership is drawn from the larger Muslim community. And it's Muslim-led, and it's free from state coordination or control. And hence, from the very beginning, it had a chance of being seen as a legitimate player within the field of counter-narrativity. In terms of organizing structure, the movement tried to establish branches at the coast in Nairobi, northeastern part of Kenya, that's Garissa, Wajir, and Mandera, upper eastern Marsabit and Isiolo, and the western parts of Kenya or the rest of Kenya together, based on demographic distribution of Muslims in Kenya and prevalence of violent extremism in an area. So each zones are then further seen to be at least addressing certain specific constituencies, such as the youth, professionals, women, religious leaders. And the movement, from the very beginning, also tried to establish some form of structure in terms of a steering committee. And what I find fascinating among all the structure is what was referred to as reference committee, composed of Muslim religious leaders, prominent ones, who validate and read and certify that what is produced as counter-narrativity actually is part and part, is something that can be agreed upon as based on authentic Islamic religious knowledge sources. So the movement also, from the very beginning, tried to rope in particular individuals, especially from the far-flung areas in northern Kenya, who are recognized as competent and reliable leaders to be part of their activities. So the movement contextualized their campaign based on comprehensive understanding of how violent extremism propagate their ideas, recruit potential fighters using meta-narrative, such as rampant misinterpretation of text for violent niche and otherization, as opposed to other forms of strategies. In countering narratives of the violent extremists, the movement interpreted key concepts and issues that are often used by jihadist groups. For instance, one is jihad, and they try to show that jihad actually has varied legitimate meaning beyond what has been often perpetuated by the violent extreme groups. Hijrah, permissibility of war, promotion of peace between diverse religious communities, classical ideological position, for instance, on the issue of the land of Islam versus the land of war or the land of non-Muslims. Martyrdom, for instance, because often this violent extremist group encourage that one way of perpetuating violence against the other, especially the non-believers, is to blow themselves up. And also issues such as us versus them, and including revenge. There's a very strong preference, for instance, within the discourse of the so-called lesser jihad, that is the struggle against one's soul. Even going extra mile to reinterpret jihad to mean quotidian struggle in Kenya to do good for oneself and others. And Professor Mwakimako here, I'm sure you must have seen the adverts where jihad yangu ni kutangaza radio, jihad yangu ni. So they went beyond the agreed militant idea that jihad is actually to wage militaristic adventure against non-believers and others. So in a way, trying to take some of these core concepts and try to render them in a way that fits within the Kenya's understanding of what citizens can consider as an authentic way of reinterpretation of this text. The movement lists, for instance, classical conditionality for commission of war as valid, for instance, in prevention of imminent attack, in defense of self or others, or when all options of arriving at peaceful resolution has been exhausted, and that declaration of war must be done by a head of an Islamic state or a commander of an armed force, and that war must be against oppression and tyranny, and so on and so on. A closer look at this text-based jurisprudential position clearly tries, it's a very clear, blunted decontextualization of the Kenya's Muslim dilemma. Muslims are citizens, for instance, in a secular state, which is predominantly Christian, but they are not migrants or people from other places. They belong within. And that the conveners sort of do not take cognizance of the fact that certain forms of war, peacemaking, is actually the prerogative of a state in which you have an agreement of citizenship with, but not necessarily something that you can do based on the textual understanding. So the conveners continuously revisit historical roots of some of the controversial verses that militants use, the famous one being the sword verse, and try to give elaborate understanding of how are these texts revealed, what do they mean for us as Kenyans, and are they what the jihadists do or what they don't do. As I conclude, citizenship is based on belongingness to and recognition of multi-religious and multicultural nature of the state, and is derived from this majoritarian consent enshrined in our case in a secular constitutional dispensation. The prerogative of waging war or peace hence rests in the state and enforcing machineries, and hence certain conditionalities for waging war or peace or establishing treaties rests in Kenya's leaders and its forces. However, in one of the training sessions that I attended as a participant observer, there was a fascinating discussion about what I felt meant much more for Kenyan Muslims, and perhaps also for the brave people to expound on. And this refers to very fascinating discussion about a very famous fatwa that was issued by Ibn Taymiyyah who happens to be also ideological figurehead, militant groups love to quote and legitimize their action with. The fatwa is called Mardin Fatwa. Mardin was a city where this sheikh was born in, and the family fled this city when the sheikh was around 7 years. Then he was asked about Mardin. Should the people in Mardin be considered as hypocrite? Is it obligatory for Muslims to migrate from Mardin? Is Mardin still part of Muslim world? And the answers, as I came across, were listed from the fatwa to mean three. 1, 5 minutes, okay, that's great. Flat one page. The lives and properties of people in Mardin are inviolable. Their living under subjugation of Mongol does not compromise any of their right, nor can they be maligned verbally or accused of hypocrisy. 2, as long as the inhabitants of Mardin are able to practice their religion, they are not obliged to immigrate. 3, they should not give assistance to those who are fighting against Muslims, even if they are forced to flatter them, be evasive or absent themselves. And 3, which the fourth one, which is very important, the territory is neither part of Muslim world, it is under domination of Mongol, nor is it part of non-Muslim world, since it has population of Muslim. It is composite. It is in fact composite of the two. The last part of this fatwa has been interpreted differently. One version says that Muslims be treated according to their right, non-Muslims be treated according to their own right. But however, there are certain popular circulation of the fatwa in which, instead of the non-Muslim population being subjected to live under their own right, that it is quoted as they should be fought. And this is the popular version that is largely used by militant groups, a sort of blank check for takfir against the local Muslim population who live in such kind of state, or violence against non-Muslim state. And there was a conference done around the Mardin issue in 2010, in which one of the leading sheikhs in Saudi Arabia, the Mauritanian-born Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, who led other scholars and tried to look at exact interpretation of this text and what it means for global Muslim community today. So as I end, I want to hint at 4 points. What are the promises and problems associated with this kind of counter-narrativity? The first is we have now devolved governments, and devolved governments are critically playing very good role in how violent extremism are being fought. The Kenya Center for Counterterrorism was tasked with developing CVE, national CVE strategy, and finally they pushed the requirement further, asking Muslim majority counties to develop their own CVE programs. And Mombasa, I think also Kilifi or Kwale had done, Lamu has done, I think Kilifi has also done. In a way, Muslim majority areas are also trying to address the problems of counter-narrativity. This could be a strength in a way, because they understand the local dynamics that feed into the agenda of violent extremist groups, and they can actually do much more in terms of readdressing some of the issues that have been raised, including putting up better development track record. Instead of shifting the blame to national government, they can now do something with the resources that they receive. And also, increasingly, despite the fact that devolved government has occurred, there is also upcoming very vocal voice of secession, not coming from MRC, but from governors. For instance, Mombasa Governor Joho and Amason Kingi have gone on national television and say we actually should think about seceding. Why not? And so on and so on. So these calls are also coming at devolve level, not just for opportunity of solving it, but also for increasing possibility of fueling secession or separatist discourses. And the second point that I wanted to emphasize is that the scholars are not doing much more going beyond the classical interpretation of the text. They still do not contextualize how to understand, how to navigate between citizenship within a secular multi-plural state and interpretation of the text that calls for certain disagreement, how the text produces points for it. What do we make of this? How should they go beyond the classical text and make crossover of conceptualization of Muslims as equal citizens within a non-Muslim population where various religious and non-religious constitutions exist, and so that citizenship is not seen as something that is something that's a privilege, but it's part and parcel of your own identity within the state itself. And finally, increasingly the youth that have joined violent groups are also coming back. Amnesty is offered without considerable legislative framework for greater incorporation of these individuals who have gone out of the country to fight it. So the reintegration issues in terms of these rogue citizens who happen to be Muslim are not increasingly being discussed. And so this fuels discourse of alienation, because if these individuals come and they disappear, those who wish to come back cannot come back. And finally, given that Brave has taken the initiative of discussing, addressing this discussion, it provides a very good opportunity for intellectual discourse about the place of some of these concepts within Kenyan Muslim community today. I'll end it there. Thank you.